Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 41. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and we are here. It's playoff time. Super Wildcard weekend is just hours away. We've got you covered with a full deep dive of our best bets this weekend. If you listen to the pod, then you know that our record this season with the best bets was a whopping 92-70. And we're going to continue to finish up the year strong. More on that in a sec. But first, we got an announcement for you. Be a pro and win with DRF Sports Pro, introducing DRF Sports all-new premium data feature on drf.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is just $8.25 a month, you can get industry-leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With the playoffs here, it's the best way to make some money this postseason and have fun while doing it. DRF Sports Pro, sign up now at drf.com/sports. And hopefully we can help you out with some information here, as well as our goal is to keep you winning some money. We did so during the regular season, and the goal is to do the same now in the playoffs. And for that, we're joined by friend of the show, Mr. Matt Russell. And luckily for you and me, he joins the show right about now. I can't lie to you, even though it was only a couple weeks ago, this feels like Christmas Eve to me because the playoffs are finally here. And I can't lie, it's one of my favorite times of the year, the day before Wildcard weekend. Even though it's Super Wildcard weekend, whatever that means, cool. But the point remains, all your playoff bets seem likely. You're talking yourself into maybe I could have a perfect record heading into the playoffs, you know? But it never turns out that way. But anyways, we're here. Got my guy, Matt Russell. He's here to talk us through the playoffs. We got best bets. We got betting angles. We got props. We got everything. But most importantly, we got you, Matt Russell. How you doing, my dude?
Good, buddy. Yeah, a little Christmas Eve-y, right? Yeah, I dropped the super from Super Wildcard Weekend. I was there for Super Wildcard Weekend when it was 3 games on Saturday, 3 games on Sunday. That felt super to me, mainly because it would just be a full-on indent in the couch situation, like bleary-eyed come Sunday night. Is there even really a game on that I'm watching, or is this just a fever dream? Now that we got the Monday night game, it doesn't seem as super-y to me, right? Just like we're stretching it out a little bit, giving people a break on Monday where they can actually like go to work in between games. It's not a Super Wildcard weekend if I got to go to work in between those 2 games. Now, again, my work is doing this, so you know it's not I'm not complaining like I got to go to the work at the bank or anything like that, but yeah, it doesn't feel as supery to me. So I'm still pumped up about it. I just don't like that we have to wait back until back to 4:00 again on Saturday, right? I need some 1:00 football in my life, but I digress. Happy to be with you here, man. Can't wait to talk about a little wild card action here. NFL playoffs, like you said, man. Can we go perfect? How could we ever lose a bet? Everything makes so much sense. Well, as you know, That's not always the case.
Everything right now seems so easy, so let's get right into it as we start off on Saturday. The Raiders are at the Bengals. Bengals favored by 5 points. And I'll be honest, I hate watching and betting on Raiders games because I normally betting against the Raiders, but also their offense is so much dependent upon what I like to call the Joe Flacco throw it up offense for pass interference calls.
Yeah.
But also they have a special teams coach running the show. And yet, in this moment, I see myself leaning Raiders because it's too many points and I want the Bengals to win so much, but I need my brain to like reel me in and be like, them in the playoffs. This is a big spot for them, right? And you're talking about a lot of young guys on the Bengals. This is a big spot for them to be favored by 6 in their first go in the playoffs. It's a lot of points, too many points, if you ask me. That's how I'm leaning. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think by and large it's down to 5.5 now, right? Because this line has moved through the 6.5 down to 6, down to 5.5, and yeah, just sort of updating it here on Friday morning. Yeah, it's still 5.5. Yeah, it is funny, right? It's like the Bengals haven't won a playoff game in 31 years. So now all of a sudden they're going to win this game like comfortably with like Derek Carr throwing up pass interference balls all day. Like, you know, for some reason, Derek Carr will always kind of drag you into a game. And maybe that means, you know, they're down 10 and Derek Carr, you know, takes them on a late drive, maybe gets a touchdown, something along those lines. Interesting thing is, and I was, especially when we get to this point in the season where everybody's locked in on so few games, you get to kind of take a pulse for what everybody is betting on, right? And I have not seen one person take the Cincinnati Bengals -5.5 here, right? It's just like
your point on that is so true. It's good, and especially about one of the games we're going to get to for sure, which has me so nervous. We'll get there, but you're so right about that. I'm glad you made that point early because that is a theme for sure.
Yeah, and you're just like, okay, well, so we're just all going to take the Raiders and it's just all going to work out and everything's going to be fine. Like, who are the people who are taking the Bengals here? Because obviously from a sharp, you know, square standpoint, like the sharp money, if you will, has come in very early on this week in moving this line, you know, across a relatively key number of 6. And you and I talk about it a lot, you know, sort of, you know, trying to figure out the market and sort of, you know, you got a +6.5 out there. If you want to bet the Raiders, like you would think you would wait and see if the sort of Joe Burrow hype train, Jamar Chase hype train takes that number up to 7. But in this case, they were just fine taking the 6.5. They were just fine taking the 6 early on. Now, who knows, right? Maybe that's a bit of a head fake because you see sometimes, again, particularly in the playoffs, where people come in, they grab a number, force a number down only to come in harder over the top later on in the week. But that hasn't happened just yet. And by and large, it being Friday morning here, you know, the limits are up pretty high, right? I don't know how much higher. And again, it's the playoffs. Limits could get even higher on Saturday. And maybe that's what people are necessarily looking for. Or maybe just the Raiders are the right side in this game. Again, I think we talked about this maybe on Tuesday, but my number for this game is around 4. But I understand why it was bumped up because this is a really brutal spot for the Raiders, right? This would be an auto fade spot for the Raiders if this was a regular season game. And as much as it's a playoff game and everybody's like locked in and all of that sort of thing, I can't help but be like, okay, like they played like the mother of all sort of playoff play-in games on Sunday night where they played 70 full minutes of football and then have to travel to Cincinnati, whereas Cincinnati is just sitting there and they haven't been outside of Ohio in over a month, right? Like their road game to Cleveland and a handful of home games, you know, hasn't been all that strenuous for them, right? And then so they came in, obviously all of those guys rested. I'm looking at snap counts yesterday for all the stuff that I do over the score, and it's like nobody played last week other than Jamar Chase for 5 snaps so that he could get that record that he was seeking last week. And so like, it's just such a brutal spot for the Raiders. And I just look at everybody kind of lining up on the Raiders, just going like, we really think that much of the Raiders that they're going to sort of, you know, I don't want to say get back up for this game because it's a playoff game, but like we see blowouts in the playoffs all the time. And I'm not saying this is going to be a blowout. And again, it would be amazing that the Bengals just blow through their 31-year drought here by just blowing out the Raiders. But like, again, different players on this team, right? This is the Joe Burrow era players. So I'm going to play this game a little bit differently, not getting too crazy in this game, a little bit of a toe dip, and I'm sure this will sort of backfire against me here. There's not a ton out here in the teaser game this week. Okay. And so, you know, we can sort of talk about teaser legs as we go through here, but this is the first game, obviously, but this is the first one that actually makes some sense to me. If everybody loves the plus, I don't know if they love the +5.5, but they certainly love the +6.5 and the +6, right? You watch people go in and they're making bets and they're grabbing the Raiders at that number. And so I don't want the Raiders +5.5 because I've already missed out on the 6 and the 6.5, right? Which is a key number that heightens your win probability if you're able to capture that key number. But from a teaser standpoint, you can bump the Raiders up to +11.5 and you haven't missed out on anything, right? So if you could have had them at 6.5 up to 12.5 and now it's 11.5. But 12 is a dead number, right? How many games do you really see end on 12? It's incredibly small, right? It's like less than 1%, I think. And so you're not missing anything by this move. from a key number standpoint, right? Like the next closest thing might be 13 and then certainly 14. So I'm going to start a little teaser action here with this game. I'm going to tease the Raiders up to plus 11.5. That way, if it's a close game, overtime, Bengals win by a touchdown, even win by 10 points, maybe a late field goal to stretch it to a 2-score lead, any sort of hijinks late in the game, you're sort of covered from that standpoint. Could the Bengals win by 2 touchdowns and blow the teaser up? Absolutely, as you know, right? I'm not ready to back the Raiders here on the spread. I actually like them in theory more on the money line as a 2-1 money line underdog, because these are two teams like we don't really know what to expect of them in the playoffs. And so if I'm just ready to kind of believe anything in this game, which in a way that I am, I'm more likely to just say, you know what, let's just try it on the money line plus 200. But from a point spread standpoint, I don't really want to pay minus 110 to have that small window of opportunity, if you will, of the Bengals just winning by 1 or 1-5. So I'm going to start with the teaser here. It's not flashy, it's not sexy, but neither is this game. And so I'm going to start with a teaser at plus 11.5. From a prop standpoint, again, I've written about every single one of these games in their entirety from a prop standpoint, giving out 3 prop bets basically per game. We do a fun thing over at the Score where it's a yardage prop, a touchdown that I think is going to happen, and then a touchdown that's absolutely not going to happen, but every once in a while it actually does. So from that standpoint, I actually think, think about it this way. If the market thinks that this game is going to be close, even if I don't necessarily buy into it, or I certainly don't want to bet that plus 5.5, if the market thinks it's going to be close, then Joe Burrow's going to have to throw the ball here a little bit, right? And this is not a guy who's shy of throwing the football. And while it was a big Joe Mixon game the first time around, for the Bengals in their win, they didn't really move the ball all that well against the Raiders here. And so I think Joe Burrow's going to have to throw. So it's less like a matchup thing and more about a game scripting type of a thing. But I think Joe Burrow has a relatively big day, or at least has to use his arm a ton. So I know it's kind of square, as they say, but I actually have over Joe Burrow in his passing yards. You can get it sort of in the 260 range, depending on where your sports book is there. Touchdowns, I think there's some value in T. Higgins for a touchdown. He's around plus 130, maybe even a little bit better, depending on, again, what sports book you have. He's the big body wide receiver, right? Jamar Chase gets all the attention for obviously scoring all of the touchdowns, right? I think 13 touchdowns this season, but his odds reflect that. So obviously we're looking for value, maybe trying to find something that the odds makers or the market hasn't really sort of taken, in account for. Higgins has 4 touchdowns in his last 6 games, and he has 7 touchdowns in 14 games this season because he missed 2 due to injury and 1 at the end of the season. So, whether you're using the 7 touchdowns in 14, that's a 50-50, or the 4 touchdowns in 6, right? That's obviously a 66% sort of hit rate, if you will. Either way, you're getting a better price at plus 130, right? That's obviously a less than 50% win probability from a price standpoint on something that I think is about a 50-50 chance of happening. And again, from a football standpoint, right? We saw Mike Williams scoring touchdowns, doing the box out thing, saving the day, helping Justin Herbert save the day last week. Higgins is more that receiver, right? That big, long guy, boxing guys out in the red zone, in the end zone, and, jump balls, all of that sort of thing. While Jamar Chase is awesome, everybody knows that. The line is, certainly reflects that when it comes to his touchdown. And so that's one that I'm, I shouldn't say quite certain, but again, that's the one that quote unquote is guaranteed to happen. Obviously tongue firmly planted in cheek there. And then kind of a random touchdown. And this one is one where if it happens, we're going to be replaying this clip for a week. Marcus Mariota has had 5 to 7 snaps for the Raiders the last 2 weeks in critical games, obviously against the Chargers last week and against the Colts the previous week. And I think it was the 2-point conversion, if I'm not mistaken, or it may have been a third down, but he had a play in the red zone inside in the goal line where they ran him to the outside, and he comes in on 3rd and 1s and 4th and 1s and goal to go situations because he is that running threat. And sometimes they use him as the threat, and sometimes they just use him as the decoy here. Him to score a touchdown plus 550 in this game. And so, you're the Raiders, you're like, what, like, let's get loose here. Let's, throw the kitchen sink. Again, we've seen them using him 5 to 7 times per game. plus 550, might as well take a shot with Mariota. Again, who knows? Maybe something happens to Carr and Mariota actually has to come in and play a lot more than that. But I think the low end here is that he gets 6 to 7 snaps. Obviously, he's also a guy that has the capabilities of running a long one in, right? If the Bengals don't have their stuff lined up, if you will, and he can crack one because he has that straight line speed that Mariota does to score a touchdown here. Again, a little bit fluky, but that's kind of the point. Plus 550, Marcus Mariota touchdown here against the Bengals.
I like it. Lots of action there for sure. I don't like the fact that I'm on the Raiders and the points, but hey, it's time to make some difficult bets here. This is just where we're at. Next up on Saturday, we got the Pats at the Bills. Bills are 4-point favorites. I need to know the weather report. I need to know what Bill's out here cooking up weather-wise in Western New York this weekend.
That's right.
But also, like, in all seriousness for a second, what's Bill cooking up game plan-wise? Because I would like to think that Bill Belichick can keep things close with one of his crazy game plans. But my brain, again, and hey, I could come back here on Tuesday and be like, I went against my head so many times, blah, blah, blah. But the Bills are just better. They know who they are versus the Pats. We saw that in the last game. They should win this game and be able to win it by a touchdown, right? Like the Patriots, you look at their record, who have the Patriots really beat? Yes, I know they beat the Bills, but my point is throughout the whole season, right? You know what I'm saying? Like it just, it just seems too easy that narrative wise, I would just sit here and take the points with Belichick because it makes sense because this is what we do come playoff time. But the Bills are just better. They just are. And I know you hate saying that, but that's just where I'm at.
No, I don't hate that at all. And I think you're right. And I think that's sort of the thing that people need to understand, because you can easily look at these two teams and be like, well, for a while there, it looked like the Patriots are going to, potentially win the division. And, obviously they beat the Bills the first time in Buffalo. And if it's weather, like that automatically favors Bill Belichick here. And it's funny because I just popped up the weather for Orchard Park in general. And the first thing that popped up was winter storm watch. And that's not necessarily for Saturday or for Sunday, but here we are Friday morning. And it's already winter storm watch type conditions here for Buffalo. But, when you talk about that, it's funny, right? Like, because if this game was on Sunday, it'd be minus, for those of us working off of Celsius, -1. Now it's -12 on Saturday. And that's like the high. And again, that's Celsius so a little, well below freezing, I guess, is the overall point. And with it being well below freezing, okay, are we going to get some snow? Are we going to get some winds? And the answer is not really. It doesn't look like there's going to be much in the way of snow. And of course, wind, you're always going to have some or whatever. It's just going to be flat out really, really cold. And so, at that point, it's just up to the players to deal with it, right? Where with the wind and the wind and the rain, that's a game plan thing where, obviously you have to sort of factor in that you're not going to be able to throw the ball. You can throw the ball in the cold. It, like anything else, like doing literally anything in the cold, it just kind of sucks, right? Like just living out in that cold, right? And so Buffalo has had almost, a quote unquote dress rehearsal in a way over these last few weeks, right? We saw, pretty cold game, I guess, against the Jets and a full on like snow dusting against the Falcons a couple of weeks ago as well. So, I mean, they've been able to play in it, recently, and Josh Allen, you watch him do these things where, again, it doesn't have to be sort of the flashy, like, perfect conditions, Josh Allen throwing 60-yard bombs, right? It's the, great throws with accuracy that aren't necessarily, long shots down the field. And when the Bills need to win a football game, right? Whether that was the Chiefs game this year, or whether that was the second Patriots game this year, or the 3 playoff games that they participated in last year, they rely on Allen, right? And that makes a ton of sense. He is the best player on the team, and that's his legs and that's his arm. So average last year in the playoffs, 40 pass attempts and 9 carries per game for Allen, right? So he's doing it both ways. I don't love the number here. I mean, I love the number in that it's incredibly accurate. If you're thinking, +4, like 4 points with Bill Belichick, like that is somewhat of a narrative concept, right? Like, obviously, listen, I have nothing but respect for Bill Belichick. I understand that it looks really tasty to take those +4 points. There's a reason this game isn't +3, for example, or, in the case of the Bills, -3. If it was, I would absolutely be working over the Bills at -3, right? But like at 4, it's the correct number. And that's the thing that, I think some people might just look at this and be like, too many points. It's like, no, it's the right amount of points. Now, again, it's sort of almost a religious type thing. If you believe in Belichick, right? If you believe in this entity of Belichick, then yeah, you take the points. I'm actually going a different way with this because, and this is why I bring up the weather and why I'm glad that you did. Everybody's worried about the weather, and it's gonna be cold, it's gonna be this, that. I think that's depressed the total. We talked about this on Tuesday, how I grabbed the 43.5 over the 43.5. This is up to 44, and I think could go a little bit higher here because this number is just too low. Speaking of things that like just isn't correct, 44 is just too low right now. Now 44 is a relatively key number, right? You can, 24-20 is certainly the sort of extrapolation here with a 4-point favorite. But I think both teams are going to be able to move the ball. We know that the Patriots are. And so I look at these the previous 2 games. It isn't just the first one in the windy conditions. It's the other one as well, where the Bills led throughout the game. But the Patriots are like, we don't care. We are still going to run the football, right? Like Damian Harris had 3 touchdowns and over 100 yards in that second game as well, had over 100 yards. Obviously that long run that kind of changed everything when it came to that first game, but he had 100 yards in both games, right? And we know the Bills run defense. It's not just going to become awesome all of a sudden, right? And so I think the Patriots still run the ball and just kind of take their chances. Maybe they score first like they did in Buffalo. Maybe they don't maybe they don't have an early lead the way that they didn't in the game in New England. And so I think they're just still going to be able to run the ball. I don't think the Bills can do anything sort of fundamentally to stop them. If they do, that might open things up for Mac Jones. I still don't think Mac Jones is looking to throw too much in, below freezing conditions. So I think the Patriots are still going to be able to score. We know that, one way or another, they're going to be able to come up with points. There might be a defensive touchdown, something along those lines, or at least a turnover. Hopefully the kicking balls are warm enough that these guys can actually kick the football. Wind isn't going to be the issue. And footing shouldn't be the issue if there isn't going to be any snow. It's really just going to be kicking a rock hard football. And obviously I think the Bills can score on the Patriots, as we saw when they actually had reasonable conditions in New England. So I think this game goes over the total of 44 points.
I was going to ask, because you're talking about the ball. Remember when you used to talk about the ball pressure? Remember those numbers and all that when that was a big thing for like 2 years? What happened to that? Do we even mention that anymore?
KPIs or something? I don't really know what's going on there. So from a prop standpoint, you should mention these. Josh Allen, obviously, I think is going to have heavy usage. So anything Josh Allen over is certainly interesting to me, but the market is fully aware of that. I'd say maybe the best one is maybe his rushing yards, because I think it's in the high 30s right now. And I think that's a decent number. His touchdown number is okay. I think it's like plus 170, something along those lines. That's decent. Dawson Knox is always an interesting option because they run plays for him around the goal line. But I'm going to actually fade the Bills run game in my sort of main prop. And that's Devin Singletary. His number is up into the mid 60s right now. And that's because if you look at the box score, he's had a couple of 100-yard games recently, but that was against Carolina. I think the Jets was pretty close to a 100-yard game. Same thing with the game against the Falcons, obviously in the snow. But those are games where it's a blowout type of a game. You're not worried about what's going on with the Carolina offense. You're not all that worried about what's going on with the Falcons offense in the snow. And you're certainly not worried about Zach Wilson and the Jets. And so you can play it a little bit more conservatively. But as I mentioned, right, whether it's the playoff games last year, this team is run through Josh Allen. And I look at the Patriots matchups where it's 12 carries for 30 some odd yards for Singletary. The Buccaneers game, forgot about even mentioning the Buccaneers game, where it was literally all Josh Allen, 100 yards on the ground and 400 yards, something like that, passing, or 300 plus. It's less, I'm fading Singletary, but it isn't necessarily anything personal to Devin. It's about knowing that the game is going to go through Josh Allen here, and that I think the Bills figured that out last time against the Patriots, that no matter what the wind is doing, no matter what the conditions are, we just got to do it through Josh Allen here. And then sort of the fun touchdown bet or the touchdowns bet, if you will, here. What do I have here? Of course, Damian Harris, 3 touchdowns in the second game. The first game, he had a touchdown. Again, if he's going to be running the football, I don't mind him. I think you can use a smattering of running backs for the Patriots. Ramondre Stevenson could vulture one down by the goal line. Brandon Bolden is the guy who's going to catch the ball out of the backfield. Maybe there's something there. Bolden is plus 350 to score a touchdown. Stevenson's plus 250 to score a touchdown. So all the running backs kind of interesting from the Patriots. But one thing that sort of shot out to me, as again, I like to dig through the snaps for all these different matchups. The only time this season where Jonnu Smith had more snaps than his counterpart, Hunter Henry, was in that wind game against the Patriots, and he had considerably more snaps. And so if the Patriots are coming in going like, the only chance we have to win this game is to run our run-heavy offense, then Smith is going to be on the field a lot. And now, again, maybe just Damian Harris and Stevenson and Bolden, maybe those guys are the ones who run in these touchdowns, again, in a game that I think is going to be higher scoring than the market thinks. So by and large, there's kind of just value on everybody to score a touchdown. If no one thinks anyone's going to score, then obviously there's going to be value on that. So I think Jonnu Smith has an outside shot at plus 500, plus 700, depending on your book, to score a touchdown here, just because he's going to be on the field. And again, what's the best friend for a young quarterback who maybe doesn't love the cold? It's the tight end, right? And if, again, it would be Hunter Henry. But again, if you're going to be in run formations, in run packages, then Jonnu Smith could be the target there as a long shot touchdown for Saturday night.
Ooh, Saturday night's going to be fun. And what do you know about Patriots on Saturday nights in the playoffs? It's never been a thing before, right? No, never happened. Nope, nothing to see here. I'm on the Bills though. I'm on the Bills. Just saying. Let's switch over to Sunday. And Sunday's action, we begin with the Eagles, who are at the Bucks. Bucks are 8.5-point favorites. Can't lie to you, this seems like a little too many points. I don't want to lay that many points with anybody in the playoffs, but at the same time, I take a step back and I remind myself that year after year, wildcard weekend, I feel like we talk ourselves into taking points and then watch games and realize, oh no, that team sucks. They really probably shouldn't have been in the playoffs. They just were lucky to be here. And especially now when we're adding extra teams, like, who are the Eagles? They're probably a pretty good bad team, if that makes sense. If that makes sense, you know.
Sure.
So I look at the Bucks. The Bucks are front runners in the sense that they beat up on said bad teams. 8.5 points. I'm okay with laying those points. I don't like it, but I'm gonna lay the points because I like it more than me sitting there hoping for, Jalen Hurts backdoor cover, like, oh, we need a spark. Here comes Gardner Minshew, right? Maybe he can give us a spark.
The Minshew spark would be an absolute disaster. Now you can't have a Minshew spark situation here. Yeah, I think I think one of my favorite moments this week, and sort of my, I always have a podcast going, in the background while I'm doing work. And the admission from Bill Simmons, you referenced the good bad team concept, right? And that's his old sort of thing, was that he's like, I think I've realized that the Patriots are the good bad team. And it was almost like a therapy session where, like, he's, after labeling all these other teams over the last 2 decades, the good bad team or the bad good team, and just sort of bestowing that label on them, he, 20 years in, has finally landed on the Patriots this season being that good bad team, if you will. I don't hate what you're saying there. I certainly, can understand it. You'll hate yourself a lot less by betting on the Buccaneers, in theory, right? Until maybe the Eagles get the first touchdown, and then you go, oh God, now I gotta, now we need to go on a 17-0 run. You're right. Now I got to go 17. I'm going to play it again. Maybe we're starting both days here a little bit too conservatively, if you will, but like, I'm going to kind of go on the same line here, but this is the one line that does sort of lend itself to a tease, right? We're sitting here at -8.5. This thing could go to -9 at any time, right? We didn't really talk about the Washington football team last week, but that was one where we were running, not walking, to tease that game down. And we had that, against the spread as well. This is one where you're going to want to hurry up before this goes to 9 and tease the Buccaneers down from -8.5 down to 2.5, right? Because as we know, we're capturing all the big numbers. We're capturing 3, right? How critical is that? What if this game somehow goes to overtime, right? We're capturing 3, we're capturing 6, we're capturing 7, we are fully capturing 8 in that tease. And so we have the leg already sitting there waiting, the one that isn't that sort of traditional long teaser leg, with that Saturday game with Cincinnati and I almost called them Oakland, Las Vegas. So Las Vegas plus 11.5, and then Tampa minus 2.5 is the tease. We don't have to tease totals. We don't need to tease the same game that day. We don't have to get into that weird space. These are the only 2 games this week that have legitimate teaser legs that if you use the alternate spread, you would be paying more of a price than you would via the tease. So again, if we're sitting there and we saw a relatively entertaining game between Cincinnati and Las Vegas, and we were sitting there and Tampa Bay and Philly kick off, and we just need the Bucs to win by a field goal to cash our bet, I would be completely content with that. So that's how I'm going to play this game from a side standpoint. We have seen the total drop here because guess what? As much as the Buffalo weather was under scrutiny, guess what? It might be sketchier in Tampa. Maybe not obviously from a cold standpoint, but from a wind and rain standpoint. And anybody who's seen once it gets windy and or rainy in Florida, it can get pretty weird pretty quickly here. So that's actually going to inform me, not on a total here, because again, this line has dropped here a little bit. I'm going to actually do the thing that you're not supposed to do. I'm going to fade Tom Brady here a little bit. I'm going to take his under passing yards in a playoff game. 277.5 is the number. And that feels sort of theoretically low because you think of Tom and it's 300 yards and this, that, or whatever. Couple of different reasons why. One, obviously that weather situation, but you can't be making bets necessarily predicated entirely on the weather. It's going to be more about the personnel in both of these games. And, a couple of different ways here. From an Eagles side, you know what they're going to do, right? It's going to be run the football. It's going to be extend drives with Jalen Hurts and his leg. It's going to be using that armada of running backs that he has, especially in the rain where defensive linemen are slipping around. The offense knows where they're going to go and the defense has to react. That's always trickier in sort of icy conditions and weather, sort of scummy field type conditions as well. So I think that's what keeps the Eagles in this game, which is going to, as the cliche goes, keep the Buccaneers off the field. The other thing is Leonard Fournette is going to be back for this game, and I see him having a role. And whether that's in the short passing game or the run game, this isn't going to be just drop back and throw it a billion times because, Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin and all those guys, even your man Cyril Grayson has come up with an injury here, right? Like fake Antonio Brown, Schmantonio Schmown is not going to be in this game, or doesn't look like he's going to be in this game. So we're working off of some real, I don't want to say randoms because Tyler Johnson is all of a sudden like the number 2 wide receiver option here. And Brashad Perriman and like these sorts of guys, right? Scotty Miller, right? Like these are guys who are more downfield deep threats, guys that you just want to run a go route, throw it up deep for. And now maybe that works out, but it does leave just Mike Evans kind of sitting there on his own, and there has to be a rolled coverage situation for Evans. So maybe he has a bunch of catches, but it might not be for a ton of yards. So the point is with Fournette sort of taking up some smaller chunks of yardage, the Eagles having the ball a fair amount here, I just think that there's a better than 50-50 chance that Brady doesn't necessarily have some big, awesome throwing game. Now, there's also a decent chance that he doesn't necessarily need to do so because the Buccaneers just kind of win this game comfortably and can turn to that ground game in the fourth quarter. And so if you have an 8.5 point spread here, right, that indicates that obviously the Buccaneers should have this game in hand late, whether it's a 7-point lead, a 10-point lead, a 14-point lead, something along those lines. And so again, I'm going to try it here with Brady. That's a little bit sketchy. I will say from a touchdown standpoint, like the Leonard Fournette number is outrageous right now. He's like minus 150 to score a touchdown in some spots, minus 120 in others. And it's like, that's a bit much for a team that will throw it into the end zone and has, again, they have their own armada. In this case, it's a tight end armada. Gronk right now, plus 130 for a touchdown. Playoff Gronk, man, like, again, I think I do it literally every week, but it always resonates. The Tom Brady documentary series, right? And they got to the point where Gronk is ready to retire. And they just, he knew, he's like, well, I'm kind of just phoning in this regular season. It was the year that he got suspended for a game for like head spearing Trey White for Buffalo. And he's just like, I was so glad to not play for a week. Like, it was awesome. Like, yeah, it cost me 300 grand in game checks, but like, I'm so happy not to play in that game. And that was the year that he retired, obviously sort of unretiring here, obviously for Tampa Bay. This is a guy who just admitted, like, I was here for the playoffs. Once the playoffs started, they were like, yeah, Gronk in Pittsburgh, he was making catches off his, shoe tops. He was all over the field and blah, blah, blah. Then, got hurt against Jacksonville that year. It's like Gronk gets up for the playoffs. And so I don't necessarily love hitting his overs for yards and catches because obviously, as I just mentioned, I'm sort of down on the passing game here a little bit, as much as you possibly can be for Tom Brady. By the way, I would wait on this to see if the number goes up, and it certainly will if the weather report gets a little bit better. But as far as the touchdown is concerned, Gronk plus 130. I just don't see how he's not going to, he's always gets at least a target in the end zone here. So he's the best bet as far as those guys in that kind of 50-50 range, because Mike Evans and Leonard Fournette are sort of taking a lot of that energy. Tyler Johnson's certainly going to be on the field a lot. He's interesting as far as anything that he does. But from a Philly standpoint, there's just a handful, the armada of running backs, right? And yeah, Jalen Hurts could score and Miles Sanders could score, but like Miles Sanders would somehow go out of his way not to score this season. It was always somebody else. And Boston Scott is plus 300 to score a touchdown. And Jordan Howard is plus 400 in some places there. And so if you split a bet on those two guys, I got to think one of those two guys is going to score. Obviously, you can always be wrong. Maybe it's just Jalen Hurts. And again, his total rushing yards number is about 49 right now. So you need a pretty solid number out of Jalen Hurts. I'll probably end up betting that because, listen, I don't have a ton necessarily in this game, as I'm just kind of relying on this teaser potentially. And, God help me if the teaser gets blown up in that first game. I don't know what I'm going to end up doing because I don't love anything else from a tease standpoint the rest of the week. So I couldn't even really start a new one here with this game. So that's why Cincinnati and Las Vegas is so important to me. So just a handful of touchdowns there potentially. Again, the number from a total standpoint has been depressed down to, I want to get the number right here, 46, right? I mean, think about it this way. That number right now is 46. It's around the same number as Buffalo and New England at 44. And we know all about sort of the cold in Buffalo, whereas this is more just a rain and wind situation, as we know, right? When it's rainy, when it's windy, it can be tougher to move the football here for the offenses, but I'm not ready to take the under 46 on a game that involves the Buccaneers and an Eagles team that can move the football as well.
Should be interesting. I like the Bucs for sure. I think Bucs roll, but that's more so what I'd prefer, what position I prefer to be in watching that game, sure, which doesn't really equate to gambling wins either. So, hey, take that with a grain of salt. Let's move on to a very interesting game. And some might argue maybe the most interesting game because there's a lot of talk about this. You got the Niners at the Cowboys at home, 3-point favorites. And here's the thing. I've been waiting for this moment since the start of the season to bet against Mike McCarthy in the playoffs. And he's primed to be out-coached in the playoffs by Shanahan. It's here. But again, I feel as if everyone and their moms is telling me this is the upset of the weekend. This is the upset of the weekend. And that worries me. I'm on the Niners. I'm taking the points, but I'm not nearly as confident as I should be because I feel like everybody is telling me, this should happen. And yet the line is still at 3. Right? If everyone's betting on the Niners, why is the line still at 3? And plus, the narratives people are throwing out there, it's almost as if like they just think the Cowboys suck all of a sudden. Like the Cowboys can't do anything. The Cowboys are just going to roll over. And it's like, nah, that's not how I see this game playing out. I'm more so on the points because I think it'll be a close game, and I'd rather be on the points. It's coming down to these coaching decisions and game plans. I'll take the points in Shanahan. That's where I'm at. What do you think?
I'm right there with you. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's scary, but it isn't all that surprising, right? Like everybody has been looking forward to betting against your boy McCarthy. Yeah, I mean, I have seen at least more people interested in the concept of the Cowboys than I have, for example, the Bengals, right? Like you can, if we're sort of doing the like take the pulse situation, right? It's like nobody liking the Bengals. It's people taking the Patriots because like it's quote unquote too many points, or people taking the Bills because they are the quote unquote better team, right? Like it's about a 50-50 split in my sort of very unofficial, my unofficial study, right? It's, oh, Buccaneers, like I get why we would take, a lot of people taking the Bucs and a lot of people taking the Eagles because of how many points there are sort of available there. And it should be worth mentioning, last thing on the Eagles before, we move on here is like, it is a different team in the second half, at least from a structural standpoint, right? Since they played the Buccaneers that first time. And so you could sell me on the idea that like, because they have changed so drastically that it's going to look different and it's going to work out better for them than when they mega backdoored the Buccaneers in that Thursday night game early on in the season. As far as San Francisco and Dallas is like, I mean, it's just this game that the way that the card has sort of shaped out. And I'll be honest with you, I don't love the card. And that was part of the reason why we were so bummed out that the Chargers didn't make the playoffs. And as funny as it was that the Colts and Carson Wentz blew that game, like Colts and Chargers not being involved here has really kind of killed, I don't want to say some of the interest because it's the freaking wild card weekend. Like you're always going to be interested, but killed some of the sort of cachet of these games. Like imagine if the Colts were visiting Buffalo and the Chargers were visiting Kansas City, like how much more interesting some of these games were. And I say that to, relative to this game, because those games don't exist. Now we just get narrowed in, right? The Sunday night game is now kind of crappy. And we have to narrow in on like, okay, well, what's like the good game? And once we narrow in on what the good game is, we then sort of decide that that's the game that there's going to be an upset in, because mathematically, like this is the one that is most likely to be a quote unquote upset. That's what the point spread is for. That is what the money line indicates, right? Like that is why we assign values to these teams, right? Nobody's going out on a limb and going like, I think of anybody this weekend, it's San Francisco has the best chance to win. It's like, yeah, like that's what we do here. Like that, like the whole point of this. Why has it not come off of 3 either way? Because the number is 3. Like the number, it like always should have been 3. It always should be 3. And if it came off of 3 one way or another, that's where you need to worry. And right now it's looking closer to Dallas minus 3.5 than it is to Dallas minus 2.5, which if you like the 49ers is terrifying. That if it ends up hitting 3.5, and while it's great that we're going to get plus 3.5, it's also terrifying that they're willing to give us plus 3.5, right? So as long as this stays on 3, I'm kind of okay with it in that way. But here's how I'm going to play this game from a San Francisco standpoint. So here's the way I think about it. Yes, there's certainly a possibility this game lands on Dallas winning by 3. And if you bet the plus 3, you push and you get your money back. Okay, great. There's also obviously at least somewhat of a possibility that this game lands on 1 or 2 for Dallas, and you would be costing yourself a victory if you just straight up played the money line. But if this game never goes to 3.5 and a plus 3.5, like that's I had just a half to buy on the 49ers at that point, even if we are sort of terrified by it. But if it never goes to 3, I'm just watching the money line. The money line opened plus 125 on the 49ers. And I was going to be sitting there going like, I don't really have anything on this game because, plus 125 is not really a fair price on the 49ers. Now we're talking up to plus 140, up to plus 145. And so here's how I think about this team when it comes to Shanahan, whatever. This is going to be boom or bust for me with the 49ers. Either they are just going to lose this game and we are going to never know what happened, or they are going to show on Sunday that with all the pieces healthy, they have finally figured out how to use Deebo Samuel. Because remember when Deebo Samuel was like, he was second in the league in receiving yards, and like, he hasn't fallen off because his receiving yards have necessarily gone down or his threat as a receiver has gone down. It's because they use him to run the football now, right? Like we did 8 weeks of watching the 49ers, especially without George Kittle, like, and Brandon Ayuk was missed MIA, right? It was like, okay, where's Kittle? Like, where is literally where's Kittle? He's obviously on the sideline, in street clothes, but like, where is Brandon Ayuk in theory? And it was like, okay, we have Deebo Samuel to throw it to, and we're still not super sure who our running back is that we're going to hand it off to. Well, now you have Kittle back. You've got Deebo doing both, right? You got Ayuk actually looking dangerous out there, and all those guys are sucking up attention. And you saw with that late touchdown, I think it was, Was it the last touchdown? I think it was the last touchdown, right? Where it was Jawan Jennings, who was just wide open against the Rams. Because you're looking around, you're like, where's George Kittle? Oh my God. Where's Debo? What's happening there? Like, are they going to run the football? And then it's all of a sudden like Jawan Jennings just sitting there wide open. It's like, hi, I like scoring touchdowns. And so he does. And so the point is, if like this is that version of the 49ers, as much as we see some flaws, right, in the defensive back secondary situation, and like Dallas going to be able to take shots and beat them deep, maybe, get some pass interference calls, all of that sort of thing. As much as we sort of see all that stuff, like this might be the best version of the 49ers. And if that's the case, I want to ride them for a little while here. And so you have the option right now to grab them at 11-1, even close to 12-1 to win the NFC, win the NFC and go to the Super Bowl. I'm going to play it differently because this is not something that we talk about. This is sort of chapter 1. And I think, you, me, and the audience are kind of on to, chapter 2, chapter 3 of the How to Sports Bet Handbook here. But chapter 1, includes a little portion where you talk about the futures in the playoffs. You really should not be betting any futures once we get to the playoffs. The seeds are set, the money lines are projected, and you are getting taxed a ton off of what the number should be. If you just roll over San Francisco on the money line, which means make a bet, whatever your sort of standard unit is, maybe it's $20, right? You make a bet on them to win the game here, money line plus 140. You take that winning and your initial investment, and then you roll that over to the money line the next week, and then you do so in the next week. Let's look at the matchups here, right? If San Francisco wins, they are the 6th seed. They are likely to play Green Bay unless Philadelphia gets weird and wins in Tampa Bay. But we'll talk about that sort of backup plan, here in a second. If they win this game, they go to Green Bay. Well, you and I have talked about San Francisco's, a pretty live dog in that situation. I think San Francisco is one of the teams that Green Bay doesn't want anything to do with. Maybe the only team that Green Bay doesn't necessarily want anything to do with, right? And so they go to Green Bay. I think they are live to win. Maybe the point spread, I think the point spread would be about 4.5. That's my projection. I imagine it's Green Bay, Lambeau, all of that sort of nonsense, probably closer to 6. And if it is, that just makes the money line even more valuable, and we will definitely be betting the spread that week as well. But you're going to get a decent price there on that money line against Green Bay. And then if they beat Green Bay, look at all the different ways this would go. Yes, sure, if Philly knocks off Tampa Bay, that's implicit value, right? Like if you're knocking out one of the top teams in the NFC, then yes, San Francisco becomes more valuable. If they don't, Tampa Bay would then be playing the Rams in most likelihood, right, as the favorite on that game on Monday night. Tampa Bay and the Rams, the last time the Rams have played Tampa Bay, the last 2 times, they have won pretty comfortably, both in Tampa Bay last season and earlier this year in LA. Well, okay, let's say LA beats Tampa Bay. And now you've got San Francisco and the Rams. Shell, you know where we're headed with this. 6 straight victories over the Rams in a possible NFC championship game where, again, it would be in LA, but you saw all the red this past Sunday in that stadium. Oh, yeah. Like, I'm not saying like it's some guarantee that they're going to beat the Rams. I'm not saying that it's some guarantee that they're going to beat the Packers, but relative to the money lines that are going to be available for those 2 hypothetical games, I actually like the 49ers in those 2 games better than I do in this game. Obviously when you factor in the price that you're going to have to pay, right? Like, again, it's the Rams game will probably be, I imagine it's not going to be, 4, 3.5, the zone that we saw this past week. It'll probably be closer to 3. But again, like, I don't know how, I know how you don't make the 49ers a favorite there, but like, I would certainly almost have the 49ers as a sort of, intrinsic favorite to win that game. And so I just think you can do better here from a value standpoint if you just roll over money lines. Now, again, they may lose this weekend to Dallas. Anytime Dallas has faced a decent-ish team, that's come to town, that team has left victorious. And I'm talking decent-ish. I'm talking about the Denver Broncos with Teddy Bridgewater. I'm talking, right, like truck job. I'm talking about the Raiders, right? Like, yes, they're kind of only decent by definition of making the playoffs somehow as the 5 seed. I'm talking about the Arizona Cardinals, right? Like, what's the big win for the Cowboys this season? Certainly at home, like a week 1 win against the Eagles, when the Eagles didn't know what they were, week 2 or something, it was early on in the season, when the Eagles didn't know what their identity was, and they're throwing the ball a ton and you're not handing the ball off. And it's like, that's the night and day issue with the Eagles, right? That's how they've changed from pass oriented to run oriented over the course of a season. And so this is sort of an all or nothing type thing where it's like, okay, instead of a futures bet, I'm looking to grab the money line here. I'm going to roll that over. And maybe we never find out whether the 49ers were live to beat the Packers or live to beat the Rams or, whatever. I just think that's the way to play it. And mathematically, once you start rolling over a plus 140 into a plus 170, 180 type thing that they'd be in Green Bay, maybe even higher than that again, if there's some, extra Green Bay sort of consideration there. And then back again to another like plus 140, in a 3-point dog situation, you start multiplying that together. It's a lot more than 11-1. It's closer to 18, 19-1. So that should give you sort of an understanding of like, you should never bet even something that looks as juicy as an 11 or a 12-1 here on a 49ers team that I think we all think is at least talent-wise capable of getting to the Super Bowl. There's never good value once the bracket has been made, if you will, right? And so if you're going to invest on a futures bet, you want to do it well before the playoffs when there's still room to maneuver and teams can increase their value by their playoff positioning, right? You look at the AFC, and we'll get to the Sunday night game here in a second, like, who's increased their chances of winning more than Kansas City has over the last couple of months, or even in the last week, by ending up getting Pittsburgh instead of, for example, the Chargers this week, right? Like that has helped them a great deal. As for the rest of this game, the props and that sort of thing, right? I'll tease the article on the score that's going to be out on Saturday, maybe even later today, depending on how much I can get done here. I kind of actually like the total as well. I don't know really how either team necessarily stops one another here, and it's 51, so it's like the highest of the week here. Yeah, it is the only one in the 50s this week. I kind of like the over in this game. I think that's going to be, sort of a thrill ride here. And then obviously touchdowns, right? It's kind of a pick your poison or pick your favorite guy here, because there's obviously a ton of guys that are fully capable of scoring a touchdown here. Kittle, Samuel, like all these guys are in that sort of even money type zone here. But let me pull up the numbers here. Obviously the running backs as well. Let me pull up the numbers here as we've got, the Amari Coopers of the world are plus 187. Like that is certainly interesting. I mentioned Juwan Jennings plus 300. If he is going to be in red zone type packages and people are going to ignore him because they are worried about those other guys, Juwan Jennings is certainly a possibility there. And for the Cowboys, we sort of quasi hit with the touchdown of Sean McKeon early on this season. Again, in the stuff that I write about, he's plus 850, the sort of backup to the backup tight end. You never know. Again, Cowboys getting a little healthier in tight end here, but at plus 850, he's a guy who might score. And your man, Juice Check is 10-1 to score a touchdown. Okay. Kyle Juszczyk is 10-1 to score a touchdown. So a couple of interesting ones there.
Love all of that, because a lot of it involved talking about my Niners. And as much as my hate relationship with Jimmy Garoppolo exists, we know I'm going to be there rooting against the Cowboys with my Niners, because, hey, that just brings me back warm, fuzzy memories of my childhood. So let's go, right? I hope they're wearing the throwback Niners uniforms too. They better be bringing those out, which I don't think they do. Maybe they only do that at home, but I can hope. Sunday night, Steelers at Chiefs. Chiefs are favored by 13 points. This game normally, and I've been realizing that so far I'm differentiating these games between what I would think if this was a regular season game and how I'm applying that differently because it's the playoffs, right?
Right.
In the regular season, this game has backdoor cover written all over it to me, right? Chiefs take an early lead, and then, maybe they like either just downshift it or, they get lax just because of whatever's going on here. But my reality here in the playoffs is they're just going to roll over the Steelers. And the reason I think that is because how many points are the Steelers really going to score? Right? Like maybe they get to 13, maybe they get to 14. I don't know. I feel like the Chiefs just get to 30 because they're the Chiefs. I can't see Big Ben throwing the ball. That it's going to be a lot of Najee Harris, so the Chiefs better be ready to try to stop the run. I'm assuming that I'll be able to flip over to Euphoria on Sunday night and be able to watch that live, because this game, it'll be game blouses. I don't want to hear the romanticizing of Ben Roethlisberger and his farewell. No. I don't want to hear any of that crap. I didn't watch that game a couple weeks ago when we thought it was his last home game and all that. No, I'm not here for all that. Big Ben salute. Get him out of here. Hope the Chiefs roll. That's where I'm at.
Well, you'll recall we won money on that premise, right? We threw the sort of narrative caution to the wind, and we said, you know what? And we also had incredible, we were lucky enough to have incredible line value in that game as well.
Made the bet and walked away. That's
right. Let it burn behind you. As that game, definitely was a dumpster fire in all things considered. So I'm not going to give you the specific numbers for all of this, because I want you to read the article that I wrote over the score. I did an AFC preview, did an NFC preview. You can check that out if you need sort of the statistical backing, if you will, right? But it's basically a game-by-game breakdown of how these two teams, from the context of 60-minute football, how they play the game. Pittsburgh doesn't, right? Like atrocious first half team, just being down every game. And they actually came back and won 3 games. That's how we got to this position here with them in the playoffs. Kansas City comes out early, right? We know this, right? Like the scripted Andy Reid plays, like getting 7 points early on. And it's funny, you go down, you look, and it's like 7-0, 7-0, 7-0, 14-0, 7-0, 7-3, 7, and it's like sevens across the board. But then you go like the rest of the game, it's just like they weren't the highest scoring team, this season. Shout out to the Cowboys for securing that for me this past week. They're not, and it's like, okay, well, because things sort of taper down throughout the rest of the game for the Chiefs, whether that's the other team gets used to, what they need to get used to as far as the speed and the players that they and that the Chiefs have, and whatever. Meanwhile, Pittsburgh, right? Like, you can just sort of think in your mind's eye, like picture any game that you've watched from Pittsburgh this season. It has basically been Tennessee taking a lead, Minnesota taking a monster lead, Baltimore taking a lead, and then just Pittsburgh coming back and pulling something out, whether it was an almost cover, an almost win against Minnesota. I mean, that one still gives me nightmares, or any of these sort of other games. So this, from just a fundamental standpoint for me, is like, we talked about it. This number is a little too high. 13 is too high. This number should be 10.5, but it's sort of like the teaser with Cincinnati and Las Vegas. Like, what are we losing? Or what are we gaining in this case, right? Last, it was like, what are we losing? Well, we lost 12 on the teaser. It's like, well, who cares? Well, then who cares if I lost 12 here with the Chiefs, right? Like, oh, great. We're getting a free 11 and 12. Okay, like, how often is the game going to land that? Now, maybe it just ends up landing that, and this is, the mother of ironic comments. But I'm not dying to bet the Steelers because of value here, because unless this goes to 14, like, there kind of isn't any. I'm also not looking to lay 2 touchdowns against a team like the Steelers, who can do stuff on defense, right? And who can run listen, their offensive line is a bit of a dumpster fire as well. And can they run the football? Well, maybe. The answer is they're going to try to run the football, as you mentioned, with Najee Harris. And maybe that's why they're a decent second half team, because taking Najee Harris in the face all game long gets a little bit tiring, and maybe they're more willing to sort of do that. But the thing is, like, we have this game because these two just played in Kansas City, and we have that in our mind's eye. So it's easy to say, like, Kansas City's going to score 30. And like, how does Pittsburgh get to, 15 even, right? And it's like, because we just saw that. But like, the Steelers are still dangerous. Like, they still just pull this stuff off, but I'm not looking to back them before the game, because I know, or at least every piece of information, every data point that we have has shown that Kansas City is going to take an early lead. And it's just a matter of how much. And maybe it's just one bad deflection and a Patrick Mahomes interception, or a running back fumbling the ball, or something along those lines that might tilt this a little bit here. But I just don't see how you wouldn't want to bet on Kansas City here early. So that's my strategy. Kansas City early, Pittsburgh late. And so Kansas City early means first quarter -3.5. It means the first half -7. Now, those numbers are taking into account that Kansas City early is going to be maybe not necessarily a popular bet, because it is a little outside of the box here, but like, it's taking into account both of these teams, right? Needing Kansas City to win by more than 7 to win your bet in that first half, is asking a lot of any NFL team. But when we're talking about a team that gets down all the time, the way the Pittsburgh does, and a team that gets up early all the time in Kansas City, then yes, sure, it makes sense. Second half, halftime, third quarter, whatever, right? If this game's even remotely close, and I'm talking like within 20 points, I think you have to then take the Steelers, because you're going to get, in a 17-point game, you're going to probably get plus 17 and a half, maybe even something a little bit better than that, or certainly not much lower than that. And so that's going to be the point where you're going to want to take the Steelers, because they will be able to get that late score. Now, they didn't get it the first time around. And again, that's what might help us here when it comes to backing the Steelers late in this game, because they didn't get that late score necessarily. Got a couple of sad field goals in that game in Kansas City. So yeah, this is one where it's stay away before the game, because I don't really want to be laying 12 and a half, 13 points. I'm certainly not dying to take any sort of value concept with Pittsburgh, but if there's a pretty clear pattern here, right? And I hate to use the word trend, because that is sort of has a negative connotation in the industry now, but like, that is quite an obvious sort of trend, if you will, right? I think the total is about right. 46 and a half, makes some sense to me. If you're talking about a game that could be 30-17, right? Like that's sort of the extrapolation there from a point spread and total standpoint. And then as far as touchdowns are concerned, I mean, listen, you got adding their dog here with Kansas City. That is certainly possible here. If I think that this game is going to be, the Steelers are going to be interesting late, I'm going to be looking at a pass catcher for the Steelers at sort of a juicier odds. Pat Freiermuth is plus 260. That's not like the most juicy ever, but he's a guy who gets targeted a lot in the end zone. So like that makes a ton of sense. Defensively for the Steelers, what do? Right? We're going to just play some man coverage here. We're going to send our guys. We have our, we're not going to blitz a ton, because TJ Watt is going to be able to get back there. I think once the rushing yards market comes out, and I haven't seen that yet, I think because of some questionability with regards to the Kansas City running backs, I kind of like the idea of a Patrick Mahomes over rushing prop. We'll see what that number ends up being, right? Because if he's flushed out of the pocket because of TJ Watt, it could be an accumulation of 5 or 6 yards per carry. There could be that one Patrick Mahomes like weaving down the sideline, trying to find out of bounds here before he gets killed type of a thing. Again, if that's anywhere sort of under 25, I'd be interested in a Patrick Mahomes rushing touchdown or rushing yardage. Touchdown wise, he's plus 450, which is kind of interesting there as well. Obviously, some of the bigger names are priced appropriately around even money. I'm just sort of skimming through now to see if there's kind of a bigger number. James Washington at plus 800 would be sort of the only guy in that way down subsection in the touchdown category, if you will.
Yeah, there's part of me that kind of hopes, just for our football sanity, that the game is somewhat close and interesting and it's just not a blowout, because again, it's supposed to be super wild card weekend, right? Like that's what it's supposed to be.
That's right. How can it be super if you're off watching like concert events and like finding any other TV show or something to watch, and like that doesn't feel all that super to me, right? When we'll just wait another 24 hours for the next football game. Like that's not super. That's kind of regular.
Totally. Right. Totally. Let's keep things moving though. But before we get to the Monday Nighter, and yes, I just said Monday Nighter, playoff Monday Nighter, just a little something for you to remind the people and ask the question. Have you checked out Cash Grab? Well, Cash Grab is DRF Sports' all new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting. Who will win the first quarter? How many touchdowns will Patty Mahomes score? Answering questions like these can end in you making real money. So download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. Patty Mahomes touchdowns? I mean, hey, seems like a pretty fun question, right? I don't know. I like it. But as mentioned, on to the Monday Nighter. There is a Monday night playoff battle between the Cards at the Rams. Rams favored by 4. I understand why nobody is going to want anything to do with the Cards. What we've seen from the Cards down the stretch, I get it. Problem is, they're playing the Rams.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know what to make of this game. I'm leaning Rams, but I don't like the number at 4, right? Like that's the problem. Like
that's fair. Like there's been some Rams -3.5 available again, depending on your sports book, right? A pretty prominent offshore one was giving. I don't know if they still are, but it was available all week. I grabbed that. I grabbed the Rams -3.5. This is this you'll hear from just about everybody, but it's because it's true. This is probably our only chance to fade Cliff Kingsbury in a playoff game. And maybe it ends up going 0-1 because they lose by a field goal because he does something dumb and like gives the Rams an extra possession, something along those lines. Who knows, right? Look at it, man. Like this Cardinals team, you and I thought they were, and I'm going to use the word fraudulent, but like relative to what their undefeated record and their 10-2 record, and Colt McCoy is out there doing stuff. And again, kudos to them for sort of achieving all of that. Yep. But Dennis Green, former Cardinals coach, right? They are who we thought they were. But not only that, they're much worse than we thought they were without DeAndre Hopkins, right? Like it has fallen apart without DeAndre Hopkins. And like, I don't know why everybody seems to be still looking the other way. And it's funny, we put these two teams in the same category because the Rams had that high profile stretch where they lost 3 games in a row, basically all in prime time, or at least sort of heavy focus games, right? It was a Sunday nighter against Tennessee. Then there was that one against Green Bay. That was like, it was a 4:00 game, but it was obviously sort of like the Fox Maine game. And then there was another one in there that is escaping my memory right this second, but I know it exists. The point, and of course they had this, the destruction game where the Cardinals crushed them in that first matchup this season, right? We look at these two teams the same way, and like I don't disagree with that. I was fully ready to fade both of these teams depending on what the matchup was coming into the playoffs. And so we talked about the AFC matchups kind of going the wrong way for us from an interest standpoint. And the NFC ones have kind of done the same thing, right? Whereas like Philadelphia and Tampa Bay isn't all that exciting. And while the Dallas San Francisco one is getting all the juice because that one is pretty good, pretty much anybody at Dallas was going to be interesting, right? Like Cardinals at Dallas again was at least going to be vaguely interesting. The Rams at Dallas, I was really hoping for as a game, to certainly watch and potentially bet on. But instead we get the, Rams and Cardinals. And like any time you get a divisional matchup, right? It's the 3rd time they've played this season. You go, okay, like I feel like I've seen this already. And so it doesn't have the same cachet. But because we're lumping these two teams sort of into each other, we're sort of forgetting that the Rams, when your man Sean McVay was dancing in the end zone, right? He was like full on like Puff Daddy, right? He's all up in the videos, and and you're thinking, man, like this Rams team looks pretty good, and they had just won 5 straight. Like it was pretty close to a finish the season with 6 straight wins and take the division type situation. Now they ended up taking the division anyway, even in the loss. So sort of all is well that ended well. The only difference was they're the 3 seed and not the 2 seed. And so I just kind of go like, as much as we kind of want more from the Rams because of like all of the, the roster and all of this sort of thing, and it hasn't been like great. And of course you go Matt Stafford throwing all these interceptions, and, there's been some ugly ones again on national TV, but, a lot of arm punts as well, right? A lot of taking shots deep and trusting your wide receiver to make a play and them just kind of not doing it. I still trust Matt Stafford. Like, how did we go from, oh man, the Rams got Matt Stafford, like now it's go time, to like now Matt Stafford is unreliable, right? Or is a liability, if you will, right? And so I just sort of look and I go, okay, like I trust him way more than I do Kyler Murray at this point, because you and I talk about, right, as flashy as like 3 or 4 plays per game look for Kyler Murray, you still look up and they lose to half of a Colts team and they lose to a playing out the string Seahawks team, all in games that they were trying to win, right? This wasn't a play out the string version of that team. They gave away the division because they couldn't keep it, right? They tried to keep it. It just slipped out of their hands over the course of a full 6-week period of time. And so I'm looking at the Rams going like, people don't like the Rams, and they were 5-1 in the last 6 weeks. And people are talking themselves into Cliff Kingsbury as a small underdog on the road here. For what reason? Just losing all of the time. They lost to the Detroit Lions, right, on the road a couple of weeks ago, right? This isn't some road warrior franchise at this point, right? And like DeAndre Hopkins not coming back, like I knew immediately I was fading the Cardinals when I saw DeAndre Hopkins on the sideline on Sunday on crutches still. Crutches does not equate I'm going to be back anytime soon. And if you're the Cardinals, by the way, think about it this way, inside the locker room, you're looking around, you're the Cardinals, you're like, D-Hop, still on crutches, man. And we just don't win any games anymore. And those two things are probably related. Like, what's your feeling coming into this game? Whereas if you're the Rams and you gave one away to San Francisco, but you got away with it from a sort of seeding standpoint, or if you will, or division title standpoint, and you look around and you go, Odell Beckham is here. Whether you think Odell Beckham is any good or not, he is still a presence. He is still a guy that people respect in that locker room. Van Jefferson has had an opportunity to take advantage of the energy that the defense has to give to Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp takes all that energy and it doesn't matter. He still catches balls left, right. It's insane watching this guy play. Tyler Higbee, not a household name, 2 touchdowns last week, right, against San Francisco. Akers is coming back. And while Sony Michel has been serviceable, all right, I'm a big Akers guy. I don't know, fresh off of an Achilles injury, like how he's even back. But if he's back, he's back. And at least they have 2 guys to rely on in that run game against a Cardinals run defense that is absolutely garbage, right? It's not a unit that we talk about a ton, but that run defense is legitimately bad. And so you look around offensively and you go like, there's a lot of talent still here. And then you look on the defensive side, right? And it's like, we had to integrate Von Miller in, and he's only going to play like a portion of the snaps on like pass rushing type situations. Jalen Ramsey's playing as good as he's ever played. And of course, Aaron Donald exists in the universe of Aaron Donald, where everybody is just a planet revolving around him in a solar system here. Like, this is the team, like, this is it, right? Like, this is the whole point of the Rams is right now. And like, they didn't do anything all that bad in the season. Obviously that 3-game losing streak notwithstanding, that maybe cost them, again, the 2 seed, obviously this past week, or maybe the 1 seed if they had, beaten Tennessee or whatever. Like, this is still a team that was built for the playoffs, and here we are in the playoffs. And so we're looking at Cliff Kingsbury, a guy who was built for anything but the playoffs, against a team that is built for the playoffs. And all we have to do is give up 4 points. Like, it's not like some great deal where the numbers say that like, oh, we should, this should be a 6-point favorite or anything like that. Those things just kind of don't exist because we all have the same numbers, right? We all know that this line should be 4. If you think that's too many, that's a personal opinion. That's not what the numbers say, right? That's not what anything from a point spread standpoint all season long has indicated. And so I'm looking at this going like, the Rams were just 4-point favorites or even down to 3.5 against San Francisco last week. Against a desperate San Francisco team that like we think highly of when they are at full strength. And now you're going to give me the same point spread against the Cardinals, this just absolute fake team at this point, or these fake superhero team that hasn't won, hasn't had a legitimate win in quite some time here. Like, what, because they beat the Bears when Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins came back? Like, what are we talking about here? So, and again, when I sort of have a strong feeling about a game the way that I do with this game, I look around and go like, all right, where's the resistance? Is this the situation? Is this Vegas and Cincinnati where everybody is on Vegas? And I'm looking for like, where is the resistance? Oh God, everybody feels the same way. I'm seeing resistance. I'm seeing people take the Cardinals plus the points. Like that's entering my, speaking of planetary solar systems here, that's entering my universe. And I just go like, I don't know how you can do that. Now, again, maybe the Cardinals win this game outright. Maybe they cover this spread because it's closer than I think it's going to be. I just don't see that. I think this is that game this week. We talked about, your man, Bill Simmons. We talked about him and his theories because, he's sort of the OG with regards to like gambling and the playoff manifesto and all of that stuff. And as much as like he's just a terrible bettor, it's still like he still has, those sort of things on his resume, which is, obviously, the principles, right? And so like, and an incredible resume that it is. Full respect to him for that. But there's always one, right? There's always one team that looks way better in the first round that sort of strikes fear in everybody's hearts, where it's like, oh, like this team came to play. Like we weren't necessarily ready for like blah, blah, blah in wildcard weekend. Because remember, like it used to be 2 buys on wildcard weekend. So you weren't even getting a top 4 team in theory, seeing them in that first week. And it was always like the 5th or 6th or 7th best team in the league. And going like, uh-oh, like this team's ready to make a run. And then they would be overvalued and you could fade them the next week and they would end up losing or whatever. I think that's the Rams this week. Now, again, does that mean I'm going to fade them next week? Because again, looks like in high probability that they would play the Bucks. And we just talked about the theory, the fact that, they might be a decent matchup against the Bucks. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like maybe the value goes away when we do have to do that because the Rams look really good on Monday night. I think that's going to be the case here. I think the Rams win this game pretty comfortably, being able to do kind of whatever they want against the Cardinals defense. And honestly, Kyler not being able to do all that much against the Rams. So from a total standpoint, I think it's probably right. 49.5. I'm not looking at, I don't think this is, high scoring, low scoring. If I had to sort of guess, but let's put it this way, right? Like if we think the Cardinals offense is a little compromised without DeAndre Hopkins, I'm going to lead under on their point total. If we are still sort of worried about Matt Stafford, maybe throwing a pick here or there or doing something, to sort of stunt the offensive potential of the Rams, maybe I'm looking at the under for their team total. And if I'm looking for both team totals to sort of be under, then maybe the under is the play here. I just like the Rams so much more than I do the betting on the total. I'm loath to kind of I'm a one or the other type of a guy when it comes to the point spread and the total. I am much better at point spreads. I did okay in totals this year. I think I went like 5-2. That tells you all you need to know about how often I bet a total. So I only like one total really this week, and obviously talked a little bit about the San Francisco one as well. So staying away from the total, though, would lean the under. From a touchdown standpoint, got to get this in. Again, honestly, it's Friday morning. This game is Monday night. I haven't even done the player prop. I don't even know what my player prop is going to be for the yardage standpoint. But if we look at the touchdown scores, you've got all the obvious ones. Cooper Kupp -138. Anytime that somebody's a minus to score a touchdown, like just steer clear. Like I know, like I know, I get it. Like he's going to be involved, but like holy cow, like -138 is pretty wild. Your guy Higbee +225. Like that's kind of interesting. The Cardinals here, right? Like you never know who they're going to have on offense, which is bad news for the Cardinals, but good news in the prop market. Antoine Wesley, I don't know that he's any good, but he gets the ball thrown to him and he's +550 to score a touchdown. So he might be your best bet when it comes to a long shot touchdown. Because obviously the Rams, like we know their personnel, right? The 2 running backs that are going to be involved, the tight end that's going to be involved, and the 3 wide receivers. None of those guys are better than like a +200 right now. So as much as we think there will be touchdowns for the Rams, there's just not a ton of value in those touchdowns for the Rams.
Super interesting stuff. And of course, that concludes our wrap here of Super Wildcard Weekend, including a Super Wildcard Monday nighter. But I can't wait for this because, as mentioned, it's one of my favorite times of the year. Right now, I'm looking at all the picks I just made, and I'm thinking, feeling good about all these.
What could go wrong?
Check back in on Tuesday, right? Check back in on Tuesday and see how I feel then, of course.
Right.
But as well, though, other things that we do on this pod, we know that there's no more college football, and it's okay. Just means that we move over. I think you can already hear the music because producers are on the ball, meaning they know what's coming. There's no college football, but there's college basketball, meaning the shot clock segment is here. I think you might have some picks for us. Let's get to it.
Yeah, let's get into it. And, listen, Friday morning's always tricky, especially when we're talking about Saturday games because the lines haven't come out yet. And last week, we mentioned it, right? Tuesday, you were hilarious. You're like, I don't want picks. I want you tweeting out the picks. Let's get some synergies going. So whether it was last Saturday's 13-3 effort or the 10-2 from Tuesday, the Twitter handle @MRusAuthentic is obviously where you want to go for the official picks. Just not last night. Because last night we got kicked around a little bit because we were, had a bunch of late night games. I didn't even watch them. I wake up this morning and I'm like, oh my God, 1-4? Like that's what we're doing with the late pick. But again, that's statistical regression. Guess what? We're not going to hit 80% this season. We are not going to hit it. Can I
ask you a question?
Sure.
Did your night go as bad as my night where I had the Bucks -1 against the Warriors? They win by like 45 points or whatever, but also had Giannis over had Giannis over 30.5 points. Giannis had 29 at the end of 3 quarters.
Oh, no.
Finished with 30.
Listen, I've had a couple of NFL props this year, and Carson Wentz was one of those with the under 28.5 attempts on Sunday, where he was so bad that he ended up going over that number because they had to throw it so much. That's the reverse of that, right? He was too good through 3 quarters to be able to go over his number. That's why this prop betting thing is so rough. But yeah, we got a little bit of statistical regression last night. It's funny how like a 2-hour period of time where you go like 1-4, all of a sudden goes, sort of rocks you right back into, planet Earth, because I'm like, we might go 70% this year, 23-5 over the course of 2 days. Like, who does that? Oh, when will we ever lose? Right. And like the notifications are coming in and it's just green. I'm like, it's like a slot machine at that point. You go, okay, like you have to realize, you and I talked about it extensively on Tuesday, like 57%. Like that's what we're going to go. Like that's the expectation. If we get a little lucky, maybe we go higher than that. Probably not. If we get a little unlucky, we're going to probably be a little bit lower than that, right? And so again, over the course of a long season, there's hundreds of bets, essentially, especially in college basketball. So let's look at some of these games on Saturday. Friday's games, I tweeted out last night a couple of picks. You hopefully got on St. Bonaventure -2. That number's up to -3. Again, part of this is just getting the best of the number and letting the chips fall where they may. And then Michigan +10. I think you can still get that at -115 as they go up against Illinois tonight, I believe. Anyway, as for Saturday, we talked about the ranked games, right? There's obviously a ton of basketball games. I'll tweet out my picks for Saturday. Those will obviously include, your Atlantic 10 conference games and your Mountain West conference games. And some, San Jose State might be involved. And these games that aren't all that interesting to the casual viewer. We got some fun ones, though, this weekend. Tennessee and Kentucky is a really fun one, right? It's one of, I think, 2 or 3 ranked games here. My projection for this line, my expectation for what the line will be is -3. My numbers make Kentucky a 4.8 point favorite. So there is quite a bit of a gap there. So I'm going to be looking at Kentucky at -3 or better in that game. Arkansas and LSU. Let's go conference by conference just to make it easier on my life. Arkansas LSU is a really interesting game here. Arkansas, not a ranked team. LSU is obviously the ranked team. My projections and expectation is this game, would be a 7.5 point favorite LSU. My numbers make LSU like an 11 point favorite, but this is one where I'm looking to maybe just stay away from, because from a matchup standpoint, this might not be great for LSU, a team that likes to turn the ball over a ton. It's just, worth mentioning that game ends up being that low at 7 or 8 points. That still might be a bet on LSU, even though the matchup is more something to watch for than anything else. Alabama and Mississippi State. I think Alabama, listen, I don't know if anybody watched the Auburn-Alabama game last night or 2 nights ago. Absolutely electric. Auburn is absolutely ridiculous. Alabama does what they do, where they're just shooting threes like crazy. Wild game. So these two teams, they obviously don't play each other on Saturday. They play Mississippi teams, both going on the road here. And I think both are somewhat vulnerable. And the first one is Mississippi State, I think, beats Alabama. So if you can get anything that is in the sort of +2, anything by a bucket, right? +2, +2.5. Maybe it's a little bit higher because of I don't think people notice that Mississippi State is good at this point in time. Whereas obviously Alabama's had a couple of good years here in a row. Auburn and Mississippi. I think this one, again, I love Auburn. They are incredible. I think the line may be inflated this week. We'll see. If it's not, I don't mind backing Auburn here if it happens to be -6 or better. If it gets up into the 9s or 10s or something like that, because of Auburn's obviously big win at Alabama, then I'd be looking at Mississippi in that game. Big 12 action, Texas Tech and Kansas State. Nobody's been more impressive than Texas Tech in the last week. They have played without some of their key guys and competed and won games. They beat Baylor on the road once they started getting a couple of guys back, still not fully healthy. They are right now, my projection is 2.4. My estimation of the line is 2. Anything higher than that, though, I'll be looking at Kansas State. I don't know how Texas Tech can keep this sort of momentum going on the road in a game that might be a flat spot for them, which is sort of college basketball 101, right? Where you want to sell high on some teams, especially if they're going on the road against teams that, aren't necessarily ones that they're going to get up for, if you will. Texas and Iowa State here. I'd be looking at Iowa State as a home underdog of a bucket. Very similar premise to Mississippi State here. Again, my numbers make this 1. I think the line is going to be 1.5 if there is value in any way on either of those numbers. Look at it this way. If I tell you that I think a number is going to be, say, 1, and the expectation of the line is, say, 1.5, if the line is higher than that, that is sort of 2 things telling me to bet the underdog here. We'll get more into the process here as we get later on into the season, and we don't have to spend so much time talking about football. Not that we don't love it. West Virginia and Kansas here. My projection on this game, again, this isn't where I think the number should be, it's just where I think the line will be, makes this game Kansas minus 17. I don't think it's going to be that high because my numbers make it 12. But if it's anywhere near 17 and closer, where I can still get some value if I think Kansas wins by 12, that's sort of the concept here. If it's 14, 15, something along those lines, I'll be on West Virginia as an underdog. Oklahoma State and Baylor, frankly, don't really have anything on this game based on my projections. I think it's going to be 16.5 for Baylor. My numbers say 16. Again, if it's something off of that, if it's 14, I want Baylor. If it's 18, I want Oklahoma State, right? Not that complicated. Michigan State, I think, should be 8 to 8.5, right? It's about an 8.3 point favorite at home to Northwestern. They are projected to be -7. If it is -7, I'm absolutely all over Michigan State. Hard to imagine that actually would be the line. Maybe there ends up being some value on Northwestern. Again, we'll see come Saturday morning. NC State and Duke. NC State, big road win against Louisville this past week. Duke, obviously, big road win against Wake Forest after getting beat at home by Miami. My projection here, again, market projection, -15.5. I think Duke should be a 17-point favorite. This might be a spot to hammer Duke if that number is lower than 15.5. Skimming through here, Pac-12 ranked games, Utah and Arizona. I've got Utah projection, market projection, -19. I've got it more as like 15.5. This might be a spot for Utah plus a ton of points here if it's anything higher than like a 17, something along those lines. Oregon State, UCLA. So one of the things that I got burned by yesterday, I don't know if I forgot this or I just didn't know this. No fans allowed at Pauley Pavilion last night. And for whatever reason, I knew that, again, when USC played Stanford. I bet Stanford anyway. They ended up winning outright anyway. So this isn't an excuse for UCLA losing that game last night. They were up 5 at halftime. That was just an absolute brutal beat on the first half line that will be featured on the internet and on Scott Van Pelt's Bad Beats here in the next week. But, these are things you have to realize, right? USC, maybe they sleptwalked through that game last night in the first half. I had them -14.5. They won the second half by 15. So they were fully capable of covering 14.5. Problem is, they didn't do much in the first half and were actually down 5 points to Oregon State at halftime. And so I'm looking at that going like, does one thing equate to the other? Like, having an empty gym, how much does that matter? Obviously, I have to sort of factor that in to home court advantage. So be careful is all I'm saying with the UCLA games and the USC games. My numbers right now make a ton of sense if the lines sort of line up. But again, if I have over assumed things here with the home court advantage, then I got to watch out for that in the future. Seton Hall and Marquette is another sort of spot where if you can get Marquette at home +2, something along those lines, absolutely that's going to be a bet for me. Same thing with Providence and UConn. If I can get Providence +3, that'll be a bet for me. Creighton and Xavier, that one I've got 8.2. My line projection is 8.5. I imagine it's probably going to be in that area. If it's not, you know what to do, right? If it's a couple points either way, take the other side. American, Houston, same kind of deal here. Well, in this case, I have Houston as a massive favorite, 12.7. My projection for the line is going to be 9.5. So if it's anything in the 9 region here, I think I'm going to take Houston as the road favorite, which is, not a place I like to be, but, numbers say what the numbers say at this point. We'll have bets on the A10 Mountain West. As I mentioned, got burned by Gonzaga last night. Not the first time, won't be the last time. Gonzaga shot 70% last night, Shell, and 55% from 3. And scored 100. They gave up 89 points to BYU, and they comfortably covered 14 points by scoring 110. Like, okay, if the handicap is BYU is going to be able to score a lot of points and all of a sudden you just run into a shooting night like that, you just sort of go, yeah, that's variance, right? Gonzaga goes on the road to they go on the road to Santa Clara. My numbers make this 10. The market projection is 12.5. It's Gonzaga. It's probably going to be higher than that. But do you really want to get into this situation where you're just fading Gonzaga because you're getting 2, 3, 4 points of value every week? I don't necessarily want to do that, right? So that's more of a judgment call come Saturday, see what the number ends up being. And then obviously a handful of other West Coast Conference games that we can take a look at come Saturday morning. But as usual, Saturday morning at Emrus Authentic, that's where the plays will be tweeted out. Everything that I do over at the Score as well, tweeted out, so you can catch up on all the actual written word stuff for each and every football game this weekend, and obviously for the rest of the season. Ton of props plays. We're going to do a little round robin. It's not underdog, but it's a parlay, right? Of the old round robin money line parlay with touchdowns. Touchdown scorers this week. Touchdown scorers.
Okay.
So check that out.
I like it. I like that a lot. Definitely looking forward to that. And the people know where to find you, because I know that's where I'll be trying to get the whole grain goodness you come through with, blessing us here on the pod, as I like to say, with the education and information each and every week. Can't wait to recap all of this on Tuesday. And that is what, that's where the real fun comes. Because what do you call it? What's a classic line? What do we call it?
That's right. Celebrating and commiserating. And listen, I'm going to be exhausted on Tuesday, because as much as there's a bunch of football and all this stuff is going on, I got a bone to pick with you here before we go.
Oh,
I was ready to just live my life, right? Get some sleep, right? Try to stay as rested as I possibly can. And then you go and you throw down an Australian Open betting preview this week. And now guess who's going to be up until God knows what time, banging all kinds of Australian numbers out there. This guy, I'm going to be betting some Aussie Open because of that. So thanks a lot, man. Thanks a lot, because I didn't need that in my life.
Hey, whoever turns down more action. We love action. More action.
Yummy.
Let's go. So much going on. Appreciate you stopping by. Looking forward to catching up with you again next week, my dude.
You got it, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks to Matt for coming on the pod. And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder. If you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, it stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. And of course, got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. We do this podcast twice a week on Tuesdays and on Fridays. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.